It's really nice to do the summit again. The last one was 2019, and it was a great event back then, and it's been a great event this year. I really enjoy Funkhouse. I like the fact it's kind of slightly more festival atmosphere than most things, and the zero sort of promotional stuff is really refreshing, at least for me, for a convention or conference, whatever, in this industry. And it's a pleasure to be taking the stage for the third time at Web3 Summit. So this year, I mean, I don't know, I think there was some maybe suggestion or expectation I was going to talk a bit about Jam. I'm not. Jam is proceeding just fine, lots of development happening, some interesting minor alterations to the protocol coming through that you can track if you want on greypaper.com. But no, this year I want to talk a bit more. I want to continue, actually, really, the talk I was doing at Decoded. Who was there for that talk, Decoded, like a month or so ago? Okay, like, yeah, not too many, maybe half. Where I was talking, I was exploring, I suppose, the concept of individuality, personhood on Web3 systems, blockchains, and so forth. And I want to continue in that vein today, with backing it up with a little bit more concrete stuff. And I hope it will be interesting. So something I'm calling Web3 citizenship. Ideology. What's it all about? Right, so citizenship. I mean, I don't know. I haven't bothered looking up citizenship in a dictionary. I don't think it's especially helpful. To me, citizenship is about sort of the belonging to a broader collective on the basis of being a person, right? It's like, I think the biggest sort of point that I want to make about citizenship is it's a property that a person has, not a property that a machine has. It's not a property that an idea has. It's not a property that an organization has. It's a property of a person. And this is actually the crucial thing when we talk about citizenship. Now, citizenship oftentimes comes with rights and responsibilities. If we think about like nation-state citizenship, responsibilities are usually, some sort of tax thing, maybe a death tax or something, some sort of potential to have to be called up to go to war or something. And rights usually involve, I mean, it depends on which nation you're a citizen of, but may involve some sort of voting right or the ability to have some, control some territory there or whatever. And I'd say it's broadly speaking these three things. And it's the first thing that I really want to dive into in this talk. Okay, so we are fundamentally talking about digital systems, right? I don't want to make any kind of discussion about non-digital systems. It's Web3. It's digitally native. It's internet native, right? So we're going to take individuality, the concept of essentially, personhood, an element of citizenship, a key element of citizenship, and talk about it in the context of a purely digital system. And I want to understand the nature of it, because it's only by doing this kind of groundwork that we're going to end up producing anything that's actually truly useful and stands the test of time. First thing to understand is individuality is not an inherently digital concept. Now, there are some people out there, I'm not going to name names, that have tried to make it an inherently digital concept by arguing things like, well, if you can provide a unique retina, a piece of data that identifies a unique retina, then it can be understood as an inherently digital concept. This totally disregards the concept of trust and that eyeballs are not individuals. The concept of individuality, in some sense like the concept of citizenship, is kind of fuzzy around the edges. I'll give you a simple example, although maybe a laughable one. Siamese twins, are they individual? Like Siamese twin that has, sort of joined at the hip, otherwise 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 heads. Is this 2 individuals? Probably most people would say yes. Okay, what about one that just sort of maybe has 2 heads, but like 2 arms, 2 legs? So like kind of just one kind of torso, 2 heads. Is this 2 people, 1 people? The reason I'm getting at it is because individuality is not a mathematically definable thing. It's something on which we have an opinion. We ultimately have to, we cannot define a truth to it in any useful way, in the same way that we define truth to the outcome of a transfer transaction as being this balance goes down some amount, that balance goes up some amount. That is very clearly a non-arguable thing. Unfortunately, with individuality, we're not starting at this point of mathematics with very clear axiomatic definitions of these sorts of operations. We're starting at a very fuzzy point, basically one of human projection of the world. And that projection, as with most things human, is imperfect. And to try to import this imperfect thing into a fundamentally perfect system is hard. Like most aspects of the world, therefore, it must be, firstly, it must be sort of discovered. Like there has to be an element of discovery about like inspection of the world to discover the underlying truth of the world. And then we have to find some sort of consensus on the validity of this discovery. Now, I'm going to dive into this a little bit more. But my main point here is there's no silver bullet. It's not that we can come up with a perfect mathematical algorithm, a perfect piece of cryptography, or a perfect hardware device and believe that we have solved individuality. It's not going to be as simple as that. Individuality is an imperfect concept. To introduce it into a perfect system is going to need some clever engineering and some judgment calls. Judgment calls that hopefully we can all agree on, but still make a useful system. Okay. Enlightened discovery. I'm not going to talk about unenlightened discovery. I don't really care about this stuff. Enlightened discovery, so discovery of things about the world since, broadly speaking, the Renaissance, the liberal Enlightenment, implies basically 3 things. Evidence collection of the world. So we first collect evidence on the world, like we measure things, right? Second, evaluation of the evidence. And third, judgment of that. Now, these 3 things are basically crucial to, amongst other things, the scientific method. How do they map onto the scientific method? Well, evidence collection, I mean, that's literally what scientists do. Evaluation is essentially the evaluation in the context of like a null hypothesis, usually. Does the evidence support this null hypothesis or not? Judgment is essentially, is there a broader consensus among scientific community that the experiment, that basically the argument, the accrued arguments, or in some sense the experimentation that has been done, implies this particular fact about this particular theory? Does it imply the truth of this particular theory or not? And this, in some sense, is how we as enlightened society discover facts, truths about the world. Now, unfortunately, in the last 10 or 15 years, in some parts of society, we seem to have lost sight of this, and we have, we see sometimes this very childish nature of like personal truth. 1 + 1 = 3, because for me, I think it does. Yeah, this is nonsense. This is immature. Unfortunately, it's become a bit of a thing, but it must be disregarded for the purpose of, for our purposes, trying to build a better world. Now, Web3 principles imply, as we should know by now, we're wearing the caps and the t-shirts, no reliance on trust, right? Evidence must be primary source. We're not Wikipedia. We're not looking for secondary source evidence. We're not looking to build on the trust shoulders of others. We are looking to build something that from first principles is defensible as being true. Evidence must also be open to all to evaluate. If it's only open to a few, I mean, there are ways of managing this, but broadly speaking, if it's only open to a few, it doesn't it doesn't result in a particularly resilient system. It doesn't allow us to ensure that the system will perform ultimately as it's desired. And furthermore, it doesn't exactly build confidence in the system, even if those who create it believe that it should work exactly right, unless it's built to ultimately be inspectable by all. It's unlikely that the broad population is going to have much confidence in it. Again, this is a pretty basic principle, but I think it's worth pointing out. And we also have a principle of universality. Individuality is a universal concept. Either I am an individual, obviously I am an individual, but like, as a digital, through a digital avatar, either I am backing this digital avatar as an individual, or I'm not. I might be an AI, I might be whatever else. It's not something where I am an individual in certain circumstances. If it's evaluated in the UK, I'm an individual. If it's evaluated in the US, I am not an individual. No, nonsense. Individuality is for it to be useful, it must be universal. Yeah? Web3 is internet native. It is not UK native or US native. It is internet native. The internet doesn't care about where you are in the world. I mean, at the moment, anyway. Okay, so let's move on. So the nature, again, we have to find consensus on these three things. The three things I brought up before. The three things that we use to discover facts about the world when we are in a notionally perfect system. These three things, you can look upon them as like a gateway from the imperfect into the perfect. Yeah? Modern scientific method uses these three things to take the imperfect world, the world of our measurements of the world, our inevitably imperfect, incomplete measurements of the world, and turn them into a perfect model. Now, ultimately, yeah, inevitably, we work our way towards it. Yeah, it's not going to deliver it on a plate on the first measurement that we take, but it is something with which we can ultimately hope to approach a quote-unquote perfect model of the world. So, we have to find consensus essentially on a new scientific method, but a scientific method for determining, for having a model of individuality. This is really, if we unpack everything, this is what we're trying to get at. So let's coin a term, a digital individuality mechanism. And we will coin this term as being a definition for these three things. Now, I gave you a rough definition for these three things in terms of a basic theory of knowledge that science more or less adheres to. Collection, evaluation, judgment. And if we define these three things, we should be able to define, we should be able to import individuality from the imperfect world, from our world, this lovely, flesh and bone, metal and water world, into the very mathematical, very theoretical, very abstract digital system, the perfect digital system. I mean, the system itself probably isn't perfect, but notionally, the model it provides, the internal model it provides, should be perfect. If it's imperfect, we're doing our jobs wrong. Okay, that's the ideology. Part 2, theory. What does it need to be designed for? What are we really aiming for here? Well, we want it to be, the first thing that I'm going to mention, and I think privacy is something that is an element of Web3 that I would say is the earlier element. Web3, in some sense, is a combination of two different fields, or at least two different communities. On the one hand, it's the one that we sort of probably most people here are most familiar with, which is the sort of Bitcoin-esque cryptocurrency blockchain side of things, right? And on the other hand, it's more the OG Tor privacy, communications privacy element. Now, both of them are about trying to provide guarantees across the board through engineering mathematics for the interaction of people. Yeah? One of them is just kind of seated very much in strictly communication, the passing of messages and the authentication of messages. The other one is in economic signaling. Yeah? Giving a strong economic signal, again, remotely with digital systems. And together, combined, they provide the elements for a platform to basically rebuild our digital systems from something where we have to trust people to something where we don't have to trust people. So much at least, and ideally, not very much at all. Individuality, for it to work, a digital individuality for it to work needs to be designed for privacy. Very basic thing. If it does its job without, like, but provides a huge database of, I don't know, say, retina scans, that's not really doing the whole privacy thing justice, yeah? So firstly, there needs to be privacy when proving individuality. Whatever this evidence collection, however it manifests itself, it should not be that that evidence collection significantly impacts my privacy, or that I do not have confidence that it will not significantly impact my privacy. That's the first thing. And just saying, trust me, it won't, isn't good enough. Second thing is, when however this individuality manifests itself within our digital systems, when it is used, potentially in, let's say, two different contexts, it should not be possible to link that usage. This is crucial, yeah? Because as we know, metadata can be almost as compromising to privacy as the data itself, if you have enough of it. And finally, if there is some sort of like financial inflow, outflow, let's say, that comes about because of this individuality, then this should also not be inherently linkable, again, for the purpose of metadata and ultimately for privacy. So the aliases that we would use in contexts must not be linkable, but nor must any payment accounts be linkable. Secondly, it should be designed to scale. Individuality that scales to 10,000 people, that's not individuality. Now, Web3 technologies are, regardless of what people say, they are not ready to scale to 8 billion people all wanting to do Facebook over blockchain, right? It's nonsense. But over time, I think the technology will be developed to that point. And in the meantime, we still need to ensure that it can be developed to the point where a system individuality could be delivering whatever this mechanism is, whatever this facility is, to everyone. And I mean, let's be pragmatic. It doesn't need to deliver it to everyone tomorrow, but it must ultimately have a path to get there. And it must be ready to deliver to a lot of people today. It's rare for a human to have all the right answers off the bat. It happens occasionally. Maybe even that human believes at the time that they know the right answers. But it's fool's luck. The ability to extend and adapt to some degree is important. Now, the ability to adapt can come at a cost of resilience, so it's a questionable trade-off. But the ability to extend need not. And therefore, it must be designed to be extensible. Whatever theoretical basis we might have for however we try to solve individuality, it's highly unlikely that the first solution is going to be the perfect solution. So the first thing to do is to create common infrastructure that makes sense. common infrastructure that can stand reasonably the test of time. Something that's minimal but fulfills its needs. The second thing to do is to ensure that there is at least one mechanism that defines these 3 points, right? How to gateway the imperfect world into the perfect world, and to ensure that other mechanisms can be added. And the final thing, possibly the most important of all, it has to be designed to, basically to be Web3, but like designed to work in an adversarial environment. The world is becoming increasingly adversarial. Some elements of the world that were once thought to be not particularly adversarial are turning to become very adversarial, and there are plenty of new adversaries to add to the old adversaries as well. We cannot rely on all governments of the world. Even governments of the world would agree we cannot rely on all governments of the world. And picking ones that we like and ones that we don't is really not a great way of proceeding. There can be no reliance on Web2 platforms. Again, it creates a trust issue. There can be no reliance on special hardware. How do we know it's been properly manufactured? And as I mentioned in the talk a month ago, it's not Web3 if there is a central key keeper or a common confessional. Right? For those who don't know, a central key keeper would basically be, a Coinbase or whatever that keeps all your keys. Don't worry, if you want to spend money, I've got the keys. I'll just unlock it for you, hand it out to who you want, lock it back up again. Your keys are safe with me, sir. No. No common confessional essentially means, give me all your information. Don't worry, I'll only use the bit of it that I need to use, and I'll keep it safe for you, and I won't show it to anybody. Not at all. No, no, no. Well, I might do some analysis on it. Or if I get a legal thing, then maybe I'll have to do that. And lots of small print. No. No trust. That's why we're here. All right. Building this system is a non-trivial endeavor, I can tell you. It is something that I've been involved with for 1.5, 2, 3 years or something now. It's a non-trivial endeavor. Technology had to be built to get anywhere close to delivering a system that is in line with what I've just talked about. Let's look at the technology that had to be built. Polkadot specific, first thing I'll mention is relay chain pub/sub. This is essentially the ability for parachains to very quickly, very cheaply publish data that is immediately available to all other parachains. It's a simple concept when you think about it, and it's something that you could in principle do over XCM, but it would become very costly and slow compared to how it can be if there's ground support for it in the relay chain. This is something we've built. Ring VRF. This is something that's used in Jam. It's a zk-snark-based primitive. Oh, that's a typo there. Cryptographic privacy primitive, essentially allowing ring signatures with an additional VRF based on the Bandersnatch curve. We have a fairly large change that I've worked on myself. Transaction extension. Essentially, what this is doing is something quite clever. It's something that the Ethereum folks have been sort of talking about and working on for some time now, in their own way. But what this allows us to do, at the moment, I mean, I would hope most people are at least a little bit familiar with this stuff. Transactions, when they make their way into, say, a substrate blockchain, they will typically have a signature, right? And the signature on Ethereum, for example, is going to be like an SECP256K1 ECDSA. On Polkadot, it's going to be an ED24519 most of the time. Basically, it's basic cryptography that says, I am a key holder and I've signed this thing. It identifies the key holder. And this makes its way down from Bitcoin, where you sign something generally to prove that you are the rightful owner of some funds. It's all very well, but if we want to have something that is natively supports privacy, particularly this kind of privacy for this purposes, we actually want to not have signatures really, because signatures immediately ruin our privacy, right? They attach us to a particular cryptographic key. We become not anonymous, but pseudonymous. And as we know, being attached to a cryptographic key, if you're attached to enough of them, creates enough metadata that compromises one's privacy. Therefore, what we really want to be able to do is not have a signature associated with a transaction. Rather, we want to have a proof that does not identify us, but merely guarantees that we have a property, in this case, a property of individuality. We belong to a set. We are not going to tell you, we're not going to identify ourselves as a specific member of the set, but we will be able to prove that we are a member of the set. Yeah? Now, this actually harkens back to something that Edward Snowden brought up 5 years ago. Might have been 6, I think it was 5. In this very room over video link, where he mentioned that we are getting to the point now where it's not enough to have money, to spend money. You also have to belong to the right group of individuals, or rather, not belong to the wrong group of individuals. Yeah? This, I mean, it begins with a thin end of the wedge, right? Okay, we don't want name undesirable politician here. I'm not going to get into modern global politics. That's a losing game. As long as you're not that person, you can spend money. You know, this seems kind of reasonable. Okay, well, we're going to extend it to this group of people. It kind of seems kind of reasonable. Okay, well, we're going to extend it to everyone with this attribute, everyone who's had any kind of link to it. And it's like, eventually, it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem partly because it's easy to add people to the set, and so it becomes done for the wrong reasons, or on a whim, or with bad evidence. Yeah, and we saw this. We saw this when, for example, it became hard to donate money to the legal fund of a certain whistleblower in our era. Basically because Visa and MasterCard and PayPal were asked very nicely to block this person. Yeah? And this is becoming the standard, unfortunately. It's also problematic because in order to enforce this, it's not enough, it's not like the governments of the world enforce this through cunning, zero-knowledge proofs that guarantee our privacy, just make sure that we're not in this set. No. They enforce this by saying, well, whenever you check into an Airbnb or do an OTC Bitcoin transaction, you need to provide your passport, and they need to write it down. And then they need to submit all of these passports on a digital system so the government knows exactly who is staying where and who is buying money. This is not exactly the society I want to be living in, to put it mildly. Let's move on. More technology that we built. One of the things that's been in the works for a while is something we're calling the bulletin chain now. Essentially, this is a very easy, very cheap to run piece of decentralized secure data storage that is heavily integrated into XCM and by virtue Polkadot. Essentially, it allows Polkadot to say, this account or this data, the pre-image to this hash, is allowed to be stored for free for 2 weeks. Yeah? This is really handy. And bulletin chain is also improved a little bit further by the fact that the data can be both uploaded easily using web technologies and downloaded easily using web technologies. Second thing is The palette that runs out, that all of this runs out of, core infrastructure for registering and utilizing the concept of individuality. In particular, registration and all of this key management, building ring signatures, yada, yada, yada. This is not entirely trivial, and that's what this palette does. And then finally, there is a palette that we call sort of the vouchers palette. And this essentially allows treasury payments that do not that do not link, or at least not fundamentally linkable to the reason for treasury payments. Yeah. Now, this is crucial to unlink any payments that the treasury wants to provide on the basis of individuality or something coming off individual, something stemming from individuality, from the individual themselves. Yeah, basis of privacy. Now, I mentioned this a little bit last month, but in terms of API, the point of being able to do this is to be able to switch out in whatever parts of your code base that you want to switch it out, that it makes sense to switch it out, a line. Now, you'll find a lot if you're a palette developer on Substrate, on the parachains or whatever, you will find in many places a line that says let account or who or whoever it is equal ensure signed and then the origin in brackets, right? And what it's doing is it's saying wherever this transaction seems to be coming from, I want to make sure that it has a signature attached, and I want to know who signed it, and it gives you an account back. Yeah. And what we want to do is say, actually, I don't care if it's signed. I don't want it to be signed. I'm not looking for a signature. I don't care who it is. I only care that A, it's a person, and B, I want an alias given my context. I'm not trying to do it for anyone else's context. I'm not trying to discover who they are in some other context. I care about knowing that alias in my context. Why do I want an alias? Well, because I don't want the same person appearing as two different things in my context to me. Yeah, that if that were allowed, it wouldn't be Sybil resistant, and the whole point of doing this would be gone. Kusama, same API. There's some cunning bridging to be done, but that's about all. And this is something that we want to see also rolled out into other ecosystems. Now, we have 2 high-quality bridges now between Polkadot and Ethereum, and it makes sense to start ensuring that these ecosystems can become as symbiotic as possible and as helpful to each other as possible. So, further integration, well, we want to be able to have multiple digital individuality mechanisms, and part of this is essentially exposing an API for when a digital individuality mechanism says, well, look, I've discovered an individual. I am really confident that all of the other individuals that I've brought to you, this isn't one of them. Yeah, it's a new one. And for any others, I'll make sure that it's not this one again. That's what we have. Citizenship, recognized personhood, simple API. We, of course, identify them by a key, but it's a Bandersnatch key, right? It's a key that allows us to jack into this ring VRF and ensure that they are not individually identifiable when these proofs arrive, when they're using this key. So as I mentioned, there's this new cryptography that we're using. It's already in use in Jam, in Sassafras, and this is something for wallets and in chains. It's relatively easy to integrate. Wallets will, if they want to integrate this, it's still relatively, hardware wallets will obviously have a bit more of an issue, but it's unlikely to be that necessary for hardware wallets. It's not like this key is going to be storing significant financial sort of assets. No. So, user access, like how is this going to work with like kind of people? How is it going to be used? Okay, well, something that we've been developing for, as I say, some time now is actually two apps. Well, one kind of web app, and then a separate iOS Android app. I've been working with Novasama to do this. And with the web app being developed in-house at Parity. Both essentially doing the same thing, both providing this interface into individuality, into the on-chain mechanisms, into the crypto, into the, I don't know. There's some moving parts here. Polkadot Vault support being added, and it's on-chain. It's like build front ends. If you want to build a front end, build front end. I mean, it's something that I think would start to become interesting, is where we see integration to things like PokeAssembly, Subsquare, and so forth. All right, let's. This sort of covers the wider picture. Let's dive a little bit deeper into individuality mechanisms. How is it that we actually expect to be able to identify individuals in this imperfect world on a perfect system? Well, we have three ideas for doing this, which I'm calling digital individuality mechanism 1, 2, and 3. DIM 1, 2, and 3. Now, they have different attributes. And the one that I'm going to describe to you today, I'm only going to describe one of them, in part because I don't have so much time, and in part because, well, you know, it's more fun to talk about things when there's something to do with them, and the other two are not yet ready. So, DIM 1. I've identified 3 different properties of individuality mechanisms. And in this case, each of them sort of have different properties, or different properties in these 3 ways. First one is remote. Do I necessarily need to move my physical location, my body's location, in order to prove individuality, right? And we have 3 different, like, in the first case, yeah, you kind of do, but like it's not that significant. The second case, you don't. It's remote, it's fully remote, and in the third case, it's not remote. You actually do need to move yourself. Okay. This is as much detail as I'm going to go into on the second and third ones, right? So you'll have to, you can discuss amongst yourself after this what you think I'm describing. In terms of frequency, it's like, how often do I have to do something here? And on the first case, it's a one-off thing. You don't have to do it very often. You don't have to do it often at all. It's just one-off. In the second and third, it's probably, second one's probably going to be weekly. Third one's probably going to be monthly. Maybe, we'll see. Not to be confirmed, but roughly speaking. And then the final thing is like, what's in it other than registering individuality? Yeah, the first one, I guess you can see where this is going. And the second and third, the third one actually has quite a lot of interesting stuff in it, interesting goodies. The second one also has some goodies, but it's more like fun. Fun is the interesting thing. This is what we're doing at Parity, but it's an open system. In principle, others can come along, and governance, if governance agrees, other mechanisms can be added. It's not just necessarily 4. The main thing I want to say here is that it would be good, and it would be good for the ecosystem, in my opinion, if we can avoid, broadly speaking, duplication from a user perspective. Like, let's not just copy other individuality mechanisms, but make a different, slightly different parameterization or whatever. And particularly from the user perspective, it doesn't make sense to have 2 different but similar things the user can do to prove their individuality. Evidence, and the other 3 are basically just what I've already talked about. Evidence needs to be primary source, not secondary source. This is Web3. Evidence must be open for evaluation, right? There's no common confessional. It's Web3. And we need a deterministic judgment. It's transparent. It's Web3. All right. So let's dive a bit deeper into what it is that, that we've built and that we are launching kind of soon, this year. Proof of ink. So for those who are familiar with the Kusama Society, this was an early experiment into basically, I just wondered, you know, if there is some incentive, are people going to do this? Are people going to get a tattoo? Like, you know, it's kind of a fun experiment. And the answer was yes. There's actually quite a lot of interest. I think there's like, what, between 150 and 200 people in the society at the moment, and it's growing last time I checked. Now, and this is in spite of a very basic user experience, very basic indeed, almost no user interface support. And so I think it's it filled me with quite a lot of, and no real, I mean, incentivization started off kind of high. I think someone once got paid 10 grand to get a tattoo, but it got very much lower in the latter days. So first, digital individuality mechanism. A tattoo at a particular place on the body. Place is the same for everybody. This is part of guaranteeing individuality with all of that stuff that I just talked about, privacy, yada, yada, yada. Of a unique design assigned on-chain using trustless entropy, right? So the chain comes up with a random number and basically hands it out to you when you ask. And this random number informs the design that it is necessary to collect evidence that you actually got, right? So evidence, so this is the first two bits is essentially evidence collection. Evidence is a final 3-minute video of it happening, right? Why the final 3 minutes? Well, firstly, it's going to be boring if you're going to watch like half an hour or whatever. It's not a very interesting thing, and even 3 minutes is probably pushing it. But AI has become, particularly generative AI, has made it very, has made this problem of individuality, a digital individuality, a much harder problem than it was when I started this very project, right? So I started really thinking very deeply about this stuff, summer 22. And in summer 22, like generative AI hadn't really taken off. A few months later, I don't know, 6, 12 months later, it became a thing. And it's like, oh, no, is it going to be for images? Is it going to be for videos? Oh, for fuck's sake. It's like AI is doing a great job at pretending to be us over a digital link. Yeah? Hey-ho. I don't believe that that this specific evidence is going to be enough indefinitely. This is the first question. I'm answering it, not because I particularly want to talk about it, but because it's like probably going to be the first question that someone is going to ask. It's not that I think it's going to work forever, but we've done some research into how good it is at the moment, and it turns out for this specific thing, like for like a 3-minute video of this happening, it's incredibly expensive, and it is not convincing. Now, it's not to say that in 2 years' time it's going to be much cheaper and quite convincing, but you know, that's in 2 years' time, and you can get a fair few people through the gates in 2 years. Finally, judgment is a common vote over the citizenry. Citizenry is just those who have already become citizens, right? Those who have proven individuality. So it's basically just the vote. Majority carries, more or less. Okay, that's our evidence collection, evaluation, and judgment defined. So let's look at it from a user perspective. How does it feel if you wanted to use this system? Well, firstly, you open the app. Now, the first thing, the thing to say about this is, it's not going to be possible to like it's a bit of a chicken and egg kind of catch-22 thing. We would like to have resistance, Sybil resistance, against like people kind of wanting a random, design, right? We kind of can't have everyone just asking the chain for a random design for free. But also, we want to make sure that as much as possible, it is accessible, kind of as a Web2 style application, right? Something that is free, something that is easy and free. So it's like, and we can do this once personhood is proven, because then we have really, really strong rate limiting. But this is for the proving the personhood thing, right? So it's like, if only we could lend ourselves the solution, and then it would be fine, but we can't. So realistically, we're going to have to either have a small dot deposit or distribute like paper vouchers. That's easy, they're rate limited. Or referrals, also rate limited. So probably it's going to mostly be with referrals or vouchers initially, but it can also be dot. Once you've opened the app with this stuff, you get given, you find yourself a design that looks good to you, is personalized. No one else will ever be offered this same design. Yeah. Then you submit evidence of it being done, and then finally you wait for it to be judged legit. So those are the relatively simple things, and the app is accordingly simple. Interestingly, the app is not a cryptocurrency wallet. It doesn't really do wallet stuff. It's really just a Web2 app that lets you choose from some cool designs. Now, these are designs that, with the one exception of the cool like planetary system thing at the bottom there, that I didn't do the sprites really either. That was code that I adapted that was on the web. The rest of it are just things that I hacked up quickly. But these are design families, right? So these are basically generative art, right? It gets given a random seed that it comes from on-chain entropy, and from that random seed, it generates you a bunch of images. And the idea is to have many of these, and you can choose from many examples within the same from many different design families. So the idea is going to have probably like, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 different possible images to choose from that that can be reset, where you get new instances of them on a rotation, like maybe every once a week or something. The design families are meant to be extended, right? This is just me messing around. I am not, I don't know. According to Rolling Stone, I am an artist. But maybe I could definitely do with practicing more. But unfortunately, my time is not infinite. If other people fancy themselves as algorithmic artists, and I'm hoping there's a few here that will take me up on the offer, then you can go to gavwood.com/entropy, and it's a little. I'll show you it. I think I have it floating around somewhere. And here we are. As you can see, there is a little JavaScript. Maybe you can't see. Can you see? Yeah, just about. There's a little JavaScript thing. Can I zoom in? No, oh, never mind. This thing here is a JavaScript. I think it's a VS Code thing, so it's actually quite a nice editor. And in here, you just get given two things, a context and a seed. The context is like a JavaScript 2D drawing context, and the seed is just a 32-bit integer. And it's like up to you what you draw on that context using that integer, right? So there's some super simple ones. Like this one, all it does is take the integer, turn it into three numbers. I think each one is whatever, 10, 11 bits, and then just convert it into Roman numerals and write it down. Yeah? Very, very simple. It's kind of fun. I recommend playing around with it and seeing. Some of these things are crazy. Like this one, this just generates like infinite sprites. And they all look like pretty decent. Anyway, yeah. There's the sky is the limit. Use your imaginations. See what you can come up with. If you come up with a cool design, submit it as a pull request to the GitHub repo. It's gavin./entropy on GitHub, and I'll merge it. if it doesn't look terrible. The idea is that governance can basically add these things. Before they get added, there's a few things that we need to do. We need to make sure that individual designs generated are not too similar. Obviously, if it just generates basically the same design for everybody, that's a problem, because then, someone could pretend to be getting a new tattoo and be a new individual when actually the tattoo is really old. We also need to make sure that it's actually a sensible design for this context. It's like lines can't be too close to each other, they can't be too fine, blah, 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 blah. We are writing, and probably will it will be integrated into Entropity, or the successor application to Entropity, when the time comes, that tells you if your design is sensible, or if it's not sensible, what's wrong with it. Like, the lines are too thin, they're too close together, they're too similar, blah, blah, blah. So the idea is that we ultimately, and it's in development, will ultimately be turned into a quite nice SDK where you can easily publish designs and generally collaborate and view some pretty nice, I would hope, procedural art. Incentives. Now, I broadly went over incentives last time, like a month ago, but I'll make it more concrete. What are the incentives here? There is a what I'm calling mob rule, mob justice. It's basically common voting, but based on individuality. One person, one vote. And this is what we use, at least initially, to judge whether a tattoo is legit, whether the evidence is legit, whether the evidence is believable. When you take part in this, I would very much like to, since it is a system activity, since individuality is both an important concept to make blockchain systems work, something that is, something that, to be fair, Polkadot already uses by virtue of the registrar system. I would hope that this is something that receives appropriate funding, since I consider it part of the security apparatus of the Polkadot network. Second thing, pan-ecosystem username. So this is something, usernames are a hard thing. Now you can go the way of like domain name systems, right? Registrars, where you basically pay, and it's like either first come, first serve, or the biggest, longest bidder, and you can think of all sorts of economic systems. This is fine, this works well in some cases, but sometimes, if it's usernames, it's a little bit different. With usernames, they're more like person names rather than kind of company names or trademarks. You really want person names. I mean, everyone only really needs one name. Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly sensible thing, as long as we have privacy in our interactions, when we want privacy in our interactions. It's not to say that we only want one name, like we only want one pseudonym, but rather we want one kind of actual name that we uncover when we choose to uncover, and that otherwise we don't. It's helpful to have one sort of piece of territory in the username space. It's not that I think that name registration, more sort of capitalist-based name registration systems are a bad thing. They're not. They're very useful for what they do. It's just a different thing. Okay, free decentralized storage. Oh, that's cool. Airdrops. Like, one of the hard things to do with airdrops is to, and I've labored the point, I mentioned it a month ago, but I'm going to, for those that weren't there, airdrops are hard to do well because it's hard to identify people. The point of airdrops is to build a community. Well, community is measured in people, not measured in funds. Yeah, if you wanted to just measure it in funds, you find just like the richest 10 people, airdrop to them, and you're sorted. But no, that's generally not what you want to achieve with airdrop. With an airdrop, you want to bring in people. And bringing in people means maximizing the number of heads, right? Maximizing the number of people. For a fixed amount of total cost. Now, the way to do that, generally speaking, is to just divide the total cost by the number of people you want to give it to and give that amount to each person, right? Split evenly. But it's really hard to do unless you can identify individuals. Like, not identify them as what their real name is, but like understand what account represents a unique individual. Well, that's what we're going to provide. And it's not something that is possible thus far. And this extends from airdrops to actually basically all free services. It's, in some sense, the backbone of Web 2. Web 2 achieves this concept of individuality in very, very imperfect means, essentially by, initially it was like, hey, what's your email address? We'll assume that if it's a different email address, you're a different person. Well, that doesn't really work. So then it went up to SMS. Okay, if you've got a different phone number, then you're probably a different person. Oh, actually, maybe that doesn't work so well either. Then it becomes like, oh, okay, if you have a sufficiently active Facebook account. And then it becomes, well, maybe we're going to actually make you hand over a credit card. And then it becomes, well, actually, no, this is, identity card, identity document, government-issued document. It becomes, it's hard. And the thing is, the more up you go, the more your privacy is compromised. Intentionally, it's by compromising privacy that Web 2 solves the Sybil problem. That's not an acceptable solution for Web 3, no matter what certain other proponents in this industry say. Okay, next thing, specialized NFTs. This is something that is a secondary project. I don't want to go into it now, but in principle, having strong individuality facilitates certain new economic dynamics, of which NFTs are a part. Surprisingly enough, because I'm pretty skeptical about this sort of stuff. And there are some other very interesting, I think, somewhere, I don't know, social economic experiments that we can do with this tooling. But understand me well, it doesn't work unless individuality is more or less waterproof, right? It has to be really, really good before we can do the most interesting economic experiments using it. Even accepting passports, even if we could believe that there wasn't like a sort of trusted intermediary that's judging whether the passport is valid or not, it still wouldn't really work because we don't have, we'd still have to trust basically every government in the world, or we'd have to say, well, if you belong to these places, we're not going to take any notice of you. Neither are very good, neither are Web3. Based on, this requires some acquiescence by Polkadot governance, but we'll see how it goes. But some of the incentives that we could implement only once we have strong individuality are free transactions. Hey, prove an individual, transact for free. Maybe we limit the amount of weight, right? Gas, weight, gas, whatever, to like, I don't know, 10 a day. But on Polkadot, we could totally do free transactions, right? And that's a pretty cool thing to begin with. We can talk about interesting newer forms of governance that, well, may or may not give better results in certain circumstances than present sort of OpenGov fellowship, blah, 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 system that we have. We can look into things like, I don't know if quadratic voting per se is necessarily going to be a great thing, but we can look into this sort of thing. We can talk about a general democratic collective, basically the citizenry, and say, well, look, maybe we're going to dedicate a part of the treasury, a budget to the citizenry, and we see how useful it can be spent. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but it seems to me to be a very interesting socio-economic experiment to be conducting. We can talk about things like lottery, and we can even have remuneration, maybe not ultimate, I think total remuneration for everything involving individuality would be problematic. It would be run to too much, but certainly getting it kickstarted could involve remuneration. Now, the great thing about remuneration is that actually all we're really doing is airdropping. And in principle, we're airdropping to new users that may not even be, well, hopefully, are not necessarily a part of the Polkadot ecosystem, may not even be a part of the Web3 broader industry ecosystem, like just legitimately new folk. And this becomes interesting because it's not really, Polkadot doesn't necessarily have to look at it as remuneration. At this point, it becomes promotion, marketing, and it's actually, there's a clear performance metric in that it's bringing someone into the ecosystem. So we have a very clear quid pro quo. All right. Let's dive into some of this stuff. So yeah, usernames, I mentioned already. This is not so we already have the name registrar, and in principle, this is sort of one name per person/organization. It's highly centralized. For those of you who don't know, it basically involves one of either the Web3 Foundation or an enterprising chap called Chevdor to sign off that, yes, this passport looks to be valid, or yes, you appear to have control over this domain. It's not very Web3, but we really needed something whenever it was, 4 years ago when we were launching Polkadot, so that validators could identify who they were. To a large extent, it's been very used throughout the ecosystem. You see it on block explorers, you see it in wallets sometimes, you see it here, you see it there, you see it in the user interface. However, we really could do with something that is not so centralized. Usernames will be necessarily non-transferable. The point of these is not to create a new economy. The point of these is to create a new piece of functionality, and one available per individual. And they would only be linkable to other identity credentials if it were desired. You don't have to link it to anything. And the nice thing is you get reverse lookups, right? Because they're unique, unlike what we have at the moment with the registrars. You would be able to do to find an account ID from a name. Another initial use, mob rule. Now this sounds kind of flippant, and it's a necessary piece of technology to create for specifically doing the initial proof of ink stuff, right? It's like in order to prove the ink, there needs to be a judgment, as I mentioned way back at the beginning, and we have to have a deterministic way of making that judgment. And that deterministic way of making a judgment is in the initial rollout called mob rule, which is basically a citizenry vote on whether something appears to be valid or not, whether a statement is true or not. In some sense, it's a decentralized general purpose Oracle dispute resolution system. I'm going to replace the need for a centralized registrar, like Chevdor, and it's used to validate proof of ink. With the idea being that it's rewarded and potentially available for private use by parachains. Now, this is a big deal, right? This is key functionality in and of itself. An effective Oracle for parachains. You can give it any English language statement, and you'll get a true or a false back from it. And in principle, we can extend this from just true or false to maybe one of a number of potential solutions, maybe something within a set, etc., etc. We can ask it for information, and magically it will be oracleized. Very interesting thing in and of itself for the ecosystem, for the wider industry, with appropriate bridging. It can also be a later version of mob rule, and actually the thing I wanted to do before mob rule, but then it was taking too long, is a judicial system that is more structured, more economically, crypto-economically sound, kind of a jury-like service where juries are selected randomly, and there's something that you do that's game theoretically sound in case the jury is either hung or if it doesn't turn up or whatever. Good. There is an eventual use that I'm not going to discuss today, but there's a little bit of a tease. Feel free to try to decrypt it if you want. If you come up with it and you ask me, I may or may not be inclined to say, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. Finally, timeline. What's the timeline with this stuff? Basically, we are aiming to deploy the baseline palette, and launch the app some point in the rest of this year, hopefully in the final quarter. Maybe, yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Final quarter. And we are aiming to launch the other two mechanisms next year. They're both in development, but one of them is further in development than the other. And again, there's a couple more teasers in case you want to guess at what they are. Good. That's all I came to say. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the conference.